A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us this evening, friends and allies from Queen's past and present. I'm Elizabeth Pilkington, a Queen's student of 2000, and I'm a member of the committee for the Queen's Women's Network. In collaboration with the Old Members Office, we're proud to host this event on the impacts of different phases of life and how we operate in the workplace. We also welcome our fantastic speakers this evening, and Natalie from the network will introduce you to them shortly. We encourage everyone to engage with our network, irrespective of gender identity. Our formation was catalysed by the celebration of 40 years of admittance of female undergraduates at Queen's, which happened in 1979. But this is a lasting cause and mission. Our purpose is to leverage the power of our collective networks and to support one another to grow and thrive. We hope you'll enjoy this event and join us at future events, be that online or in person. Your feedback and suggestions are always welcome, and we'll make sure that contact details are recirculated after the event. We do have a social media presence too, with our LinkedIn and Facebook groups, and through those we aim to facilitate contact between our members to provide insights from the diverse mix of career paths that we followed and advice for career development too. And for those starting out in their careers, or perhaps planning a transition or a return, we can promote opportunities for work experience, placements, and so on. Please do connect with us via LinkedIn if you haven't already, as strength comes from that hiving of minds. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Natalie to set the scene with our panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth said, we are all really pleased to have you all in attendance this evening. We wanted to put on an event that touched upon matters that affect us all directly or indirectly. And in doing so, we realized that this was actually quite an ambitious event and that there's a lot to cover. We could spend the whole day and more, quite frankly, discussing some of the issues which we will be touching upon this evening. So really, the purpose of this evening is just to start a discussion and to enable you to ask some initial questions, and to connect you with our three fantastic speakers who are experts in their field. So this evening we have Claire Knox, who is founder and director of See Her Thrive, Kate Davies, who is a fertility nurse consultant, and Dinah Tobias is a qualified performance business coach from Blooming Menopause. Each speaker will spend some time touching upon how their areas of expertise are relevant to the workplace and what more we could be doing and what more we need to understand. And after that, we'll have time for questions. So please feel free to either message the chat function or to message me directly through the chat function. I promise I won't be sharing any names when I raise your questions later. We also have breakout rooms or chat rooms at the end in case you want to ask more specific questions or follow up on specific points with one of our speakers or more. You can move from in between the chat rooms as well. Lastly, we just wanted to highlight that when the speakers refer to women, they're referring to individuals who are identified as female at birth, or more simply put, with ovaries. The intention this evening is to be very much inclusive and to allow questions from everybody and for everybody. And so with that, I will hand over first to Claire.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you this evening. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm just going to share my screen if I'm able to. 1 second. Apologies, this can be a little bit clunky. Okay, so just a bit of an intro from me then. Give you some context about me and the lens through which I see this. So I'm Claire, I'm a business psychologist, and I also live with two conditions really. So I have premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or PMDD for short, which is a menstrual related condition. And at 36, I'm also perimenopausal. So I completely understand what it's like to live and work with hormone related issues. And so that's why I set up See Her Thrive. That's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm really passionate about making sure that women's health and female related health issues that we're talking about tonight are acknowledged and understood and supported in the workplace. So why are periods a workplace issue? Well, I think I've got 10 minutes to give you a brief overview, and I could talk all night about this because the impact of menstrual health and periods, the menstrual cycle, hormones, it's far reaching. But I've pulled out some key headlines to try and highlight a few things that I think may be of interest. So what we're looking at then is, or what we're thinking about is really menstrual disorders, menstrual conditions that don't necessarily affect everyone. So first of all, it's important to recognize that not every person who has periods will have difficulties or face challenges, and some people breeze through periods each month and their menstrual cycle without any symptoms at all. I envy these people. But for a large number of us, we experience issues related to our menstrual cycle. And there are some numbers there on the screen for you to show just how common some of these conditions are. And if we take something like endometriosis, it affects 1 in 10 females of reproductive age. That condition is where the lining of the tissue that is usually found in the lining of the uterus is found outside of the uterus, grows in other places, and causes a lot of inflammation, a lot of pain. And so people with endometriosis can experience pain as severe as a heart attack. It's that bad, and people go to hospital because the pain can be so bad. We also have other conditions: polycystic ovary syndrome, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and a lot of these have physical, psychological, and cognitive symptoms, so can have a real impact on lots of different aspects of work. And it's often at work where people find it most difficult to manage these conditions. And that's for a number of different reasons. And again, this list could go on and on, but I've just pulled out a few key highlights, really. So the first thing is, because of the stigma around menstrual health, because it's a taboo topic and we've never really talked about it in a corporate setting before, there is stigma and there is shame, period shame, and people are nervous about being open about these things. And that raises some issues around disclosure. So when people are struggling with conditions like endometriosis, PMDD, polycystic ovary syndrome, they're worried about speaking up, but then denying themselves support in not speaking up. And there are fears around job insecurity, about being seen as incompetent, about being treated differently, and all of those kinds of things that I'm sure you can understand. Sadly, we hear of people who are going through performance management processes because of sickness absence, and a lot of workplaces rely on trigger-based absence management processes and policies, where somebody who is forced to take a day off work every month will quickly find themselves at some kind of HR review for their sickness absence record, versus somebody who's off for, say, 5 days off in a row. So anyone with a cyclical condition, or who is impacted by their periods or their cycle, immediately faces a disadvantage in that respect. And we wonder why we have a shortage of women leading our organizations, and we have a real issue with attracting and retaining female talent, particularly at that mid to senior management level. We know that discrimination happens. I have a friend who was told she'd never be promoted because of her ongoing health issues. My friend has endometriosis. She works for a very large bank. I'm not going to name and shame, but you know, there are a few big banks in the UK, so take your guess and you might have hit on it. But that those kinds of comments happen, and people are subject to discrimination like that. So the cost of period stigma, why is this a business issue? Well, when people are scared to speak up and seek help when they need it and if they need it, they push through symptoms. And I'm speaking from my own experience here of being a secondary school teacher years ago and battling through symptoms month in, month out, to the point of exhaustion, to the point of burnout. And actually the cost of presenteeism, so working through symptoms when you're not actually well enough to be at work, is far higher than absence related to period issues. And that stems from the fears and the concerns and the worries about being open about these kinds of menstrual related issues. So that's why it's really important to open up these conversations, to do things like manager training, to get people talking about these things and educated and comfortable talking about them and managing and supporting people who are living and working with them. And then I'm not going to focus on menopause because I know we're touching upon that later, but there's also a huge cost to businesses of not acknowledging and supporting menopause. We know that 1 in 10 women, as an example, have considered or have left a job because of menopause symptoms, and the lack of support around that. And 8 out of 10 women are still saying that their employer hasn't shared any information about menopause, hasn't provided staff training, or put in place any kind of menopause policy. So that's a huge, huge risk, isn't it? And particularly if we take organisations like the NHS, where 75% of the workforce are female in that demographic. So the huge cost. This is a really important issue. There's so much we could talk about and delve into. I'll be really happy to chat with you in the breakout rooms, and continue the conversation if you want to reach out at any point. But the more we can talk about this in our workplaces, the more we can be open and recognise that this is such a crucial part of diversity, inclusion, and well-being, the better for everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that was useful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. That was really interesting. I have loads of questions, but I will chat to you offline on that basis. But no, super, super interesting, and thank you, and a great start. And I guess it's a good time to hand over to Kate to talk about sort of fertility and infertility issues, and things like that.
Thank you so much. And thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I know we postponed it, so it's amazing that we're kind of all here and we've made it at last. So thank you so much. And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to follow Claire's brilliant presentation. What I do know is I'm going to be echoing a lot of her stats because they still apply when we're talking about fertility and pregnancy loss as well. So it's going to be so interesting, the commonality through our sessions, I think, today. So by way of background, I'm a fertility nurse consultant, and I've worked within the NHS for many, many years. And then 10 years ago, frustrated, I think, by the lack of support given to women and couples within the NHS when it comes to fertility, I set up my private practice, Your Fertility Journey. Initially seeing patients, and we still do that, but the business is diversified in many ways. And for the last 2 years, we've been working with organisations, supporting them to implement fertility and pregnancy loss policies and educational webinars and line manager training in the workplace. The reason that we did that is that it was a common theme that I was hearing from my patients frequently at the difficulties that they were finding when they're in the workplace. So if we consider then that infertility is a disease that impacts 3.5 million individuals across the UK, and this figure then therefore can equate to approximately 1 in 6 of all couples, the majority of whom are very likely to be in employment. And sadly, 1 in 3 individuals will suffer from pregnancy loss, which is huge when we think about it. If you could pop the next slide up, Christine, please, that would be fantastic. So research shows us that there's a real reluctance for employees to disclose that they're struggling with infertility or pregnancy loss. And this results in employees suffering in silence. And I would really urge you to sit with that thought for a moment and consider your workplace, your department, or your team. If 1 in 6 struggle with infertility and 1 in 3 with pregnancy loss, this would most likely have impacted many of your colleagues, and yet you have absolutely no idea because we just don't talk about it in the workplace. A recurring theme from Claire's conversation a few minutes ago. So why do we not discuss it? Again, it's taboo. It's maybe a desire for privacy. Do we want to be talking about our personal life at work? Embarrassment, fear, and definitely concerns over promotion if you divulge that you're trying to conceive, because surely that would mean that you'd be passed over for promotion. These are real concerns, and they're things that I hear all the time. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, infertility is a disease, and as defined by the World Health Organization. And therefore, I really believe it should be considered in an employment context, the same as we would any chronic disease such as diabetes or a cancer diagnosis. Research shows that only 1.7% of employees said that their workplace had a fertility policy fit for purpose. And of those who do decide to disclose their fertility or pregnancy issue to their line manager, only 42% receive support. And this really challenged their ability to function productively at work. Shockingly, 36% of people reported reducing their working hours or leaving their jobs completely due to the pressures of managing fertility in the workplace. And again, this is what I see every single day from my patients. I can't get over the huge loss of talent that presents, but it also creates a huge operational challenge to employers, along with a significant financial impact. What I think is quite encouraging is that in the last 18 months, I guess in an attempt to attract and foster talent, as well as to avoid potential discrimination, there have been a number of organisations, and I can name a few: Monzo Bank, for example, Kellogg's, Channel 4, have published policies offering paid fertility treatment. And they've kind of come out saying, you know, this is what we're doing, big fanfare. They're offering paid fertility treatment and pregnancy loss leave, which is amazing, fantastic that we've got policies. But I believe that a policy is utterly meaningless without an organisational culture that is supportive and understanding of the unique fertility challenges faced by their employees. Sadly, then a policy is just a meaningless piece of paper or a meaningless document on an intranet. When it comes to employment law, and I am not a lawyer, so, you know, please forgive me on this, but there is no employment law protecting individuals going through fertility treatments. It's going to change, maybe, but I'll come to that in a minute. However, following an embryo transfer for IVF treatments, an individual is considered pregnant until proven otherwise, and therefore maternity rights do kick in, but that's the only type of protection. Obviously, if an individual feels that they're treated any differently to another colleague, then discrimination law can be applicable. So what my understanding is, having talked to a number of lawyers about employment law, is that it's not going to change soon with regards to fertility or pregnancy loss. But there is a glimmer of hope in the fact that changes are starting to happen. MP Nikki Aitken recently introduced her fertility treatment employment rights private members bill to Parliament, and that was in June this year. And the second reading, I believe, is due to happen in November. And it's really hoped that this bill will require employers to allow employees to take time off work for appointments for fertility treatment. So definitely a change in the right direction. But as with anything, any bill in Parliament, it's going to take forever. So definitely changes are not going to be in the foreseeable future. But definitely, hopefully, I say definitely, hopefully, I really hope so, on the horizon. But if you think that on average, a person might need to attend a fertility clinic 9 occasions during one cycle of fertility treatment, that's a lot of time away from the office. I hear from my patients that during the pandemic, when they're working from home, this made it so much easier for them. But now that we're returning to the office, the same difficulties will or have already returned in being able to take time off. It's really difficult and challenging for them. My organisation is absolutely passionate about changing the workplace fertility and pregnancy loss experience of individuals in the UK. And as I mentioned, we do this by supporting organisations to put fertility and pregnancy loss firmly on their wellbeing agenda. And it needs to be firmly. It's a subject that for so long has not been discussed. My vision for the future, if I can be as brave to say that, is that we bring our whole selves to work. Whatever we're dealing with, whether it be personally or medically, that we can come to work and know that we'll be holistically supported without question. So that's my vision, that we can bring ourselves, our whole selves, to work. I also hope that by investing in fertility as part of the wellbeing agenda and providing employees with educational fertility webinars, line manager and training, organisations are ensuring that they are best equipped to support the fertility and wellbeing of their staff and attract and retain their talent and avoid discrimination. If after listening to me chat very briefly, and I feel like this is a whistle-stop tour to fertility in the workplace, but if you feel compelled to take action within your workplace, then there are some things that you could do tomorrow. Success stories that I've come across from organisations that we've worked with in the past off the back of our training and our webinars is that it starts to open up conversations, and organisations are starting to set up networks within the workplace. They're recruiting champions to lead, whether it be mental health champions that will take this on, or whether it's those with lived experience of infertility or pregnancy loss. And that can be so powerful, and it's been absolutely wonderful to see that. So that's something that you could take away and do tomorrow or start tomorrow, as well as maybe lobbying your employers or setting it up within your organisation. Could I have the next slide, please? So in conclusion then, as I mentioned, I think we've got a long way to go in improving the fertility and pregnancy loss experience of employees in the workplace. However, I think it is so positive to see that fertility in the workplace is no longer, as I like to call it, a Cinderella subject, where we prefer to ignore it and just sweep it under the carpet. And I feel that, like menopause, which you're going to hear from Dinah, which has definitely paved the way for fertility, and probably from Claire's point of view, women's health as well within the workplace, is that it at last is getting the recognition that needs to help to improve our well-being in the workplace. And for that, I am so delighted. As Claire said, I'm really happy to continue to answer your questions in the breakout rooms, and would be delighted to connect with you in any way as well going forward. So I hope that's been useful. It has been my whistle-stop tour, but really happy to chat further, either in the breakout rooms or offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I know that it is a very important topic that sort of everybody goes through, or more, not everybody, a lot of people go through. So I really appreciate your presentation. Thank you. And with that, I will hand over to Dinah. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Could have had a whole 10 minutes of just me moving my head. Thank you very much, Natalie. And thank you also to Claire and Kate, who have in fact paved the way for me, really, because much of what they've talked about, many of the statistics, or at least the reflections around the statistics and what workplaces need to be thinking about, and some of the stigma and conversations that need to be had, are the same when it comes to menopause. And yes, just to address actually the topic of menopause is coming up a lot more, but with clients I'm finding that they're wanting to also talk about menstruation policy, fertility, etc. So there is definitely much more of a focus. So let me share my screens. Okay. Some bizarre reason I'm getting a okay, this is very strange. I'm not actually seeing my, let's see if it actually lets me, sorry, it's not letting me share. whilst I'm trying to fix this, let me just... Yeah.
Dana, if you just try again quickly, I
think it's something to do with system preferences, because I updated my OS system and I've now realized that's what's happened. So it's not going to necessarily let me show you. I'm so sorry. Just bear with me 1 second. Should have tested this just before, shouldn't we? Anyway. It's doing very strange things. It's asking me to agree to things and do strange things. Let's just, if not, then I will abandon and just talk as if I haven't got these slides. Okay. Okay, I think I'm just going to abandon my slides, which were lovely and pretty, but never mind. I'll bring them up so that I can, it reminds me where I'm at. There we go. I would put it down to menopause, but it wasn't. It was I updated my, my OS system, and it's clearly not connecting to this. So yes, so my name's Dinah. I work mainly in workplaces. I also do coach and mentor people going through menopause, but mainly, as Claire and Kate have referenced, working with HR on looking at menopause policies, and also line manager training and general awareness in the workplaces where I focus. So I next had a lovely slide of an ostrich with its head in the sand, which you won't be able to see. And that is really where a lot of people, when they reach menopause, are at, that they basically haven't really looked at menopause for themselves. They know it's coming, but either were scared of looking into this, or there wasn't any information until recently very available for people going through menopause. And that was the situation I found myself in, and that was somewhat strange because I like to think I'm quite well read around lots of areas. Well, all I would say is what a difference a couple of years make. I had already kind of gone into post-menopause by the time the word was out on the street that menopause was something that everybody should be looking into. And now we have every other newspaper article, every other TV or radio program talks about menopause. Every other celebrity is coming out and talking about menopause. But much more importantly, we have a menopause task force in Parliament looking at what support is needed in the workplace, what should be happening in terms of GP training, because only 40% of GPs in medical school actually get trained on menopause, or till now. Shockingly, and also we have the Women Inequalities Committee who have been also looking into this area. So finally, this topic, which is something that impacts everybody who is born with ovaries, it will impact them at some point in their life, is finally being looked at. And as Claire referenced, this is the fastest demographic growing demographic in the workplace. It's about 1 in 6 people, women over the age of 50 are in the workplace. So we really need to be thinking about this. Now, I had this lovely graphic of what menopause looks like, because most people know what menstruation is all about, but actually menopause, I didn't really know what menopause was about, and I run workshops and I have people there who are in their, women who are there in their 40s who don't know what is on the horizon at all. So menopause, you could say, is puberty backwards, but with none of the upsides. So there's menopause itself is the cessation of periods. And I think it's important to define what menopause is, because many assumptions are made on this. So it's when the last period has happened, but you never know that the last period has happened because we don't get a telegram from the Queen or now the King to say, hey, here it is. And so technically we wait 12 months until there have been no periods, and then somebody is considered menopausal and then in post-menopause, which doesn't mean it's all over by then, because they could still be having symptoms. And what's happening is there's a period before this called perimenopause. And perimenopause generally happens in classic midlife menopause with the decline of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, but mainly we talk about estrogen, and this is fluctuating a lot, a bit like in puberty where we have estrogen fluctuating. We have the same in perimenopause, but it's a sort of depletion of estrogen, and this is why lots of symptoms can show up, but it's not always obvious that this is what's happening. So it can be a very, very confusing time in a woman's life. Because it might not be a very classic symptom that shows up first. It could be something like brain fog, forgetfulness, anxiety, panic attacks, heart palpitations, not necessarily those classic hot flushes, which lots of people associate with menopause. Now, so we have this perimenopause around the time of menopause. We have menopause, the last period, and the cessation of periods, and then post-menopause. And this whole time can last between, 4 to 15 years. Perimenopause might be about 4 to 7 years, and then you could have several more years going through that post-menopause phase with symptoms. Well, I was always in post-menopause after that anyway. Now, the average age of menopause is 51, and it's sort of between 45 and 55 that majority of people will go through menopause. Some people, it may be into their late 50s that they will be going still through that journey, not yet reached post-menopause. However, for 1 in 20 people between the ages of 40 and 44, they will go through what's known as early menopause. And then under the age of 40, we've got about 1 in 100 that will go through what's known as premature menopause. And this could be due to infertility, what's known as premature ovarian insufficiency. And it can be quite a scary time. Even as early as puberty, somebody could go straight away into menopause. So we shouldn't assume that it is a midlife stage of midlife process. And the reason I'm explaining this is that in the workplace, we make assumptions about the stages that somebody's at based on age, but it really is important to remember that there is premature menopause, but also the other area to consider is surgical or medical menopause. So this is an induced menopause. So surgically, that could be because somebody is, they have a full hysterectomy, so their ovaries and their uterus is removed, or an oophorectomy where just the ovaries are removed. That will plunge them into menopause, and that can happen at any stage of life. And also people who go through various cancer treatments will also experience menopause symptoms usually. So again, this could be at any stage through a woman's life post-puberty. And again, very important to think about that in the context of support in the workplace. So there are lots of symptoms when it comes to menopause, over 35 symptoms, and they range from physical symptoms. Some of them we know of around things like hot flushes, night sweats, headaches, weight gain, heart palpitations, dryness, things to do with skin, joints, aching. I mean, it's, urinary issues, vaginal issues, and dryness. So lots and lots of different areas, but also psychological and cognitive issues around anxiety, as I mentioned, memory, difficult to concentrate. You can imagine in the workplace how difficult that is, depression, mood swings, etc. So, and also changes obviously in periods. So there's lots and lots of, no person experiences menopause in the same way, and it can be quite hard then in the workplace because there's a tendency for people to make assumptions about what menopause is and how it presents. And the other important thing also is to think about is there are increased risks which come with menopause, such as osteoporosis, diabetes, dementia, cardiovascular disease, I won't delve too much into those, but they are important considerations when thinking about how to manage that menopause journey and think about it early on. In the workplace, and we'll delve into this maybe more in questions because I know I'm a little over on time. In the workplace, you know, in someone's life generally, it can feel like they're falling off a cliff. Literally, people say, I don't even recognize myself. I don't understand what's happening. I feel like I've had a ton of bricks fall on me. And so showing up at work when we're spending between a third to a half of our working lives in the workplace over the age of 45, it really can be a very difficult situation in terms of coping with that. We've already heard from Claire and Kate about the issues in the workplace around retention of talent, and certainly in that sort of post-45 age range, we might have some very experienced staff that need to be retained in certain I work a lot with universities, for example, and in those areas, you can't just suddenly find a senior academic in an area specialist area, or a senior lawyer in a law firm. So thinking about that, it's important to understand that, you know, menopause symptoms show up in lots and lots of ways, and without the right support, it can be really hard to manage. Just some interesting statistics: 14 million days are lost cumulatively due to menopause per year. Now, that's just an estimate, because most people will not say to their employers, tell the employers the reason that they're actually off work. And some in the perimenopause stage, that early stage of menopause, don't necessarily realize that some of the reasons they're taking time off work are linked to menopause in the first place. 59% have said that menopause symptoms have had a detrimental effect on their work. 1 in 4 consider leaving, and I think Claire referenced earlier, 1 in 10 actually do leave. In terms of thinking about this from an employer point of view, there's a big reputational and financial impact of all of that, notwithstanding that talent gap. And also, from a reputational point of view, there is an increasing number of tribunals being brought when menopause is being cited. Now, menopause is not a protected characteristic at the moment. This may change, but there has been a 44% increase, and this is rising in employment tribunals where menopause is being cited. But I do know that a lot of grievances are being raised around discrimination, unfair dismissal, that are being settled away from court. So, you know, it's costly for those going through menopause, because they might leave the workplace earlier, and that creates a pension deficit for them, for example, and certainly for an employer. So there are lots of things that can be done. Many of them are very similar to the ones that Kate and Claire have referenced. I'm sure we'll have a discussion about that. But a lot of it's around breaking the taboo and starting those conversations with all employees, and not just in women's networks. So with that, because I know I'm over time, I'll hand back, and I'm sorry about the slides. I'll try and maybe send those over again.
No worries. Thank you very much. Thanks, Dinah. It was, again, very interesting, if a little sobering.
Sorry. There isn't an upside, though. I'm happy to say what the upside is. I just ran out of time.
Well, hopefully we can touch on that, because it would be good to also have a positive. I suppose, and as I said before, please feel free to send any questions you have either through the general chat or directly to me in the chat function. But in terms of some follow-up questions for, I guess, all three of you, given that many of the conditions that you've each sort of touched upon this evening are not necessarily visible, in fact, most of the time it's not evident, what specifically in your areas of expertise would you like to see workplaces do to assist their employees? And I guess I'm thinking they're also male and female, particularly Kate touching upon the fertility journey, which could be quite difficult. Maybe we start with in chronological order and go with Claire first, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. So there are lots of things that I would love to see, but one thing that can make a real difference, and that you know, we've seen make a real impact with the clients and the organizations we've worked with is we've talked about it, manager training and training for the HR team about these conditions, about some of the symptoms that people may be living with and struggling with in silence and keeping hidden, and making them aware of some of the perhaps policies and processes that may be disadvantaging people who have cyclical health conditions. But that sends out a really strong message to colleagues that this is something the organisation recognises and wants to support, and it can really open up the channels of communication. So that's one thing that I would recommend, and I would love to see in every workplace as part of general well-being training or induction training, mental health in the workplace training. It still baffles me that women's health gets left out of the conversation, because it's such an important part of work life.
Thank you. Kate?
I would totally echo Claire's comment there, that line manager training is absolutely pivotal when it comes to fertility and pregnancy loss in the workplace. The damage that can be done by a line manager who handles the conversation incorrectly, maybe through their own embarrassment, perhaps they feel ill-equipped to be able to deal with the conversation, perhaps they're rushed, they don't have the time to sit down with them. There's so many different reasons, but the damage that can be done by shutting down that conversation is extreme, and I think that's been cited as one of the major problems within the workplace. So for me, definitely line manager training, and as I touched on in my presentation, I think it's also the policies versus educational webinars. You can't just have one. You need to have both for it to be able to work successfully.
Thank you. Dinah?
Yeah, so I would obviously echo what Kate and Claire are saying, that it really is, the line manager is pivotal. But so for me, I always emphasize you can't just, you know, do one awareness webinar and go tick, I've done this, because the line managers are aware. That's more often, if we look at where, for example, the tribunals that have been brought around menopause lie, it's always the line, because the line manager has either inadvertently or said something, or, you know, somewhat has been trying to manage someone out of the business and stigmatize somebody going through menopause. Things like comparative experience, you know, my wife experienced menopause this way, well, you can't be, you know, it's not so bad. That is an example. Not providing the right support to individuals and looking at the individual. But just to sort of expand on other areas, I think leadership need to stand up. It needs to come from leaders, male and female, for this to really have an impact, because we can all have policies, you know, HR are churning out policies left, right and centre for everything, but they sit in a, I think one of you said already, they sit in a dusty drawer on it, in a dusty intranet, and nobody knows. It's the long, you know, the long documents that nobody's actually reading. So they have to be brought alive through, and you know, with menopause, you know, leaders are often of that menopause age. So standing up and saying, you know, I was working recently with a director, she's shouting to everybody about menopause in her organization, and that gives permission to everybody else to feel that they can put their hand up and join in that dialogue. Men as well, actually. And actually, I find that it's the senior men that write to me directly. They don't necessarily post on LinkedIn and things like that, but they write directly and say, thank goodness you're talking about this, because my partner has gone through the most terrible experience and I didn't know how to support her.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think you, obviously education and feeling more comfortable talking about these issues are, that they're both really key developments in the workplace. I suppose one question that people have raised is what can be done to remove the sense of shame or embarrassment associated with the conditions that we've been discussing, especially in the workplace. The workplace is not necessarily an environment where everybody wants to be completely open and is always appropriate. And yet these are very personal issues. So what can be done to normalize the conversation beyond just it coming from HR or your leaders, because that's not always a comfortable relationship.
Do you want me to jump in?
I'm happy for you to.
Well, one thing that can be really powerful with smashing the stigma, if you like, and helping to squash that shame and get rid of it, is things like women's networks, which can be such a valuable source of peer support, of solidarity, of validation. And people find a lot of comfort in sharing stories and knowing that they're not alone in what they're going through. And it's incredible when you open up these forums and give people that safe space. You'll have one person talking about their PMDD experience and how difficult it is, and asking for advice from colleagues and things like that. And then somebody else will jump in with, I didn't know you had that. I've got PMDD too. And immediately that just it knocks down so many barriers and gives people that support. Because especially for females, one of the biggest threats, if you like, or things we perceive as a threat, is being on the outside, and we need that sense of belonging. I'm not going to get all woo-woo and sort of talk about tapping into my feminine energy, so don't worry, but it is, you know, it's really, really important. We need to feel part of a group. So when we're worried about being the outsider, being the one who's different, that's when we can get all of these fears start spinning about, you know, should I speak up, should I not? But power in numbers and that solidarity, never underestimate that. It's huge.
And I think we're just going to be echoing each other in all of these questions, to be honest.
That's fine.
It's all the same. But yeah, I completely agree with Claire. You know, I know that women going through a fertility journey or have suffered from pregnancy loss will try and find commonality in others. They will look for that. They will absolutely seek that out, whether it's, you know, they're doing it on their phones, trying to find forums, or going to social media and connecting with people. So if we can create within the workplace a way of connecting so that we can have these conversations in a much more proactive way through, as we mentioned, having networks, having peer support, having champions within the workplace, that can make a significant difference. And I can't estimate, I can't say that more, because I've just seen it happen in reality, and where organizations that started with nothing have just got this incredible setup that is gold standard, basically. And I'm not going to mention any names, but I've worked with some very large UK banks, and you know, I know not all of them might not be hitting the mark, but certainly the ones that I've been working with recently absolutely are. And it's just showing that best practice and sharing. You know, why on earth are organizations not sharing best practice? They absolutely should be doing that. So that's something that I would say, you know, go and learn from people that are doing it. A good example within fertility and pregnancy loss is what Channel 4 have done. They've made incredible inroads into their policies and the way that they're supporting their staff. I haven't worked with Channel 4, but you know, I know that they're doing an amazing amount of work. So I think it's definitely finding that and seeing what changes can be made, and not being frightened to put your head above the parapet, really, and just go for it. Really go for it.
I'm just going to add in from a slightly different perspective, because I completely obviously agree with the both of you. You know, having those safe spaces to talk, that are not just for women, actually for men as well, very important. I'm just going to add a slightly, because the question was a little bit about shame, and actually it's not essential. You know, people have the right to not disclose yet still be supported in the workplace, and actually HR are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because if somebody doesn't disclose something then around menopause, for example, or that they're even in menopause, there is still that protection of the Equality Act and the Health and Safety at Work Act, because if somebody's experienced symptoms, even if they haven't disclosed, then they still could potentially have a case for discrimination, etc. So I think ensuring that if there are certain adjustments, for example, that somebody wants, and they haven't necessarily disclosed, or they have, but if they haven't disclosed that they're going through menopause, that it's made easy for them to access, rather than them having to do that sort of make a big fuss about needing something. So it can be quite hard for a line manager, because they're not necessarily going to know. If they do know that somebody's going through menopause and they need that support, that they need, for example, flexible working, or they need a fan or something like that, they need to change their uniform more regularly, or better have a bigger uniform because they've put on weight in menopause, making it easy for people rather than making people feel stigmatized. Very important.
Thank you very much. We have had actually a question in, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, from Wei Kong, about some of the symptoms specifically relating to menopause. So I guess the hair, the changing of the hair, getting darker, getting whiter, sorry, or more grey, but also loss of temper, or I guess mood swings, and whether these are symptoms of menopause, or they are just separate.
I mean, I'm happy to take that. I'm not aware of hair going grey or white being particularly that's, you know, age. I mean, mine went 90% grey when I was like in my late 20s, but certainly changes in texture of hair and skin could be a menopause symptom. Mood swings, unexplained, you know, rage and tearfulness, that kind of thing could definitely, if that's not how somebody has been previously, that could be something linked to menopause. Normally, most people will experience several, you know, 5 or 6 symptoms. And as I said at the beginning, in perimenopause, they might not be those classic symptoms. Their periods could be perfectly regular, but other things could be showing up. So the best thing is to look at a menopause symptom checker. I'm happy to send one out, but they're very easy to find these days, and look through those crazy number of 34 odd symptoms and start keeping track. And actually, in terms of going to a GP, if somebody wants medical support, that's the best thing to do as well, is to take that with, because a GP has 10 minutes with somebody, and that's not enough time for if somebody says, I'm having, like my best friend, she said, I'm having panic attacks. And she was sent off for all sorts of other things other than to do with menopause. And then she had lots of other not very classical symptoms. GP didn't have much training in menopause. And she spent several years effectively going through perimenopause and menopause without any support. And when I looked into menopause for myself, I got this symptom checker, and I'm like, oh my God, look at all of this. This is everything you experienced. Tinnitus, heart palpitations, itchy scalp, burning tongue, nothing very classical there, yeah. Anxiety and panic attacks. She didn't have that support throughout.
Thank you. Claire, did you want to say something? You have your hand up.
Oh, it was circling back to the last question, which was about shame and how to, I mean, do we want to go back to that, or shall we carry on?
Happy to. There was also a follow-up on how you include men in the conversation. So I think that's probably sort of part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So just another thing to consider. Don't wait for somebody in the organization to be the champion. It can be really hard. It's very easy for us on the outside to say, speak up and be the champion and blah, blah, blah. But when you're in a workplace and you're in an organization, it can be really hard to be that person. It takes a lot of courage, and for many different reasons, you might not want to speak up and be that advocate. So get in someone external to have that conversation and to be that champion and to be that conversation starter. That means that nobody has to forfeit themselves, if you like, to take on that role. You're outsourcing it to someone else who's really comfortable with putting it out there, and that can again be really helpful if particularly if it's quite a closed traditional culture. I find that it's probably better than trying to get somebody to do it in-house.
Actually, I'm going to add to that. Nearly every client that I start working with say, how are we going to get all the men there? How are we going to get all the men onto the webinar? And says, you won't. Don't have any expectation that you're going to get all these men turning up. They're not. You'll get 2, 3, maybe 4 if you're lucky out of 80. But the men that come are the ones that A, ask questions, and B, come off mute and say, where are all my male colleagues? They need to come to the next one. And it is that, it's creating this momentum, it's changing the culture gradually, it's getting the sponsorship at leadership level. And then the men start to talk about it.
Thank you. I guess we had just sort of 2 more questions, and then we can go out into breakout rooms. So if people have more specific questions, that's a great time to ask those questions. But Kate, you touched upon this in your presentation. We're seeing an increasing awareness of fertility treatment and infertility issues in the corporate sector, and by that I mean that there's a greater coverage in, for example, private healthcare that might be provided by corporates. I appreciate it's quite a small group within what is already a small group, so we're not talking about a general wave of change. But I guess I wondered if covering expressly these issues, so the issues that you've touched upon, Claire, and you, Kate, and you, Dinah, if covering those issues expressly in that sort of benefit or care that is provided helps people feel more comfortable in declaring their conditions or their situation, and also helps in the conversation.
Yeah, I think it goes some way to do that. It's a bit of a, when it comes to fertility, it's a bit of a difficult area to navigate fertility benefits within the workplace. I think mainly because it had a bit of bad press initially when fertility benefits first became a thing, because it was mainly about egg freezing. So what does that say to your employees? Freeze your eggs and carry on working for us, delay motherhood, so it had a bit of a bad press to begin with, but that's changed and there is definitely more support. I do find that a lot of organizations won't necessarily go all the way to fertility treatments. There are other organizations now that are perhaps not insurers, but other organizations that are offering fertility benefits because that's what they do. So that's becoming a bit more commonplace. But I think it can be helpful in making it less of a taboo subject, getting people talking about it more, knowing that help and support is out there. But I think it's an area that has to be really, really carefully navigated.
Thank you. Claire, Dinah, I don't know if you have something to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, if we can turn to policies rather than benefits and just say something about that, I think making it explicit within policies, that menstrual health issues, that reproductive health issues are included is really, really helpful. I had this conversation with an HR business partner yesterday, actually, and she said, we're having problems with retaining females at mid-manager level. This is the kind of sickness policy. Do we need to say something about menstrual health or menopause? And I said, well, yes, because line managers, if it's not there in black and white, they might not think it's included or relevant. And we do have people who go by the book. We know that. And so it's people are trying to do the right thing. So if it's not there in black and white, unfortunately, you will have people who think that, they're going to toe the line and don't use common sense and say, well, no, we can't do that. So yes, I think making it explicit. And by that, by the way, I'm not saying we need menstrual leave and menstrual policies and menopause policies, but building it in and making sure that it's included and mentioned in your existing policies, absolutely, until it's normalized in the workplace. Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just to add, I keep finding I'm working with clients who have got poor performance. They call it poor performance processes, and you know, with somebody, I think Claire, it was you who mentioned this. You know, this whole absence thing, this trigger-based absence. You know, with something like menopause, you can have so many. You know, a headache one day, tearfulness and rage another day, and sleepless night another day. There's a whole load of reasons, and if the systems aren't set up, you know. There's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of tick boxing going on at the moment. And actually there's some proper changes that need to be made to things like absence management and performance management systems that actually will properly accommodate all of these things, because you can't have a policy that's not translatable. To give you a really good example, running a training session for 20 women who are going through menopause, having hot flushes in a boiling hot room with no air conditioning, when the policy itself says, that has recently been written and I've had an input into, says we will provide an environment that's cool. We just can't do this. You know, it has to translate in reality, and that does make things uncomfortable for HR. But there's no point doing it otherwise. There's just no point, because it's sending the wrong message to women and to the managers, because it puts them in an impossible situation.
Thank you. And my last question for this evening that's come through, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms, is I'm conscious that we are talking a lot about what is happening in the workplace and what can happen in the workplace. But I wonder if we also need to go further back and actually start talking about this at school level and at university level, so that generations that come up understand, firstly, what some of their colleagues may be going through, but also what they might go through, and be better prepared for that. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
I'd actually just like to start with that, because there's an amazing woman called Diane Danzibrinks, and I'm sure, yeah, some people might have seen her on TV, who started the Make Menopause Matter campaign, and that's one of the reasons that we're hearing about it, and Parliament are talking about it. And she has actually, through her campaign, managed to get menopause on the school curriculum, alongside some of the, you know, the other issues around, the other areas around fertility and reproduction, etc. So it does have to be taught in schools. How much time a school can actually give to it is a completely different thing. And of course, menopause seems a long way off for somebody that's barely maybe hit puberty. But I'm sure the other Claire and Kate will have some views on this.
Should we go backwards then? So I'll jump in next. Yeah, I mean, fertility and pregnancy loss, particularly fertility, is being talked about a little bit more in schools. There seems to be every now and again a kind of a real campaign to get it talked about and on the curriculum, and then it all goes a little bit quiet. And I think that's mainly because, sadly, parents feel that if we talk about sex, then their dearest little children will be having sex. So it's kind of getting kind of parents really thinking that actually, just because we talk about sex doesn't mean to say that your child is going to go out and have sex. Actually, the opposite. So it is a little bit of a battle against parents, and for obvious reasons. But it is something that I feel really strongly about, that we should be talking. One of my passions is fertility awareness. I think every young woman should have awareness of their fertility and understanding of their bodies, so that they can identify when things aren't going quite right, or perhaps they've got a problem. Maybe they can identify when they've got endometriosis, as Claire has been talking about, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. There's so many things that I think we should be so much more aware of, and I absolutely agree that that should start in schools.
I'm just going to echo all of that. Our curriculum is utter crap. And as an ex-secondary school teacher, one of the reasons I left the education system is because our curriculum is utter crap. And we don't prepare our young people for the world, for the real world. We aren't teaching them what they need to know. They're body illiterate. They have mental health problems by the time they reach early adulthood, because, you know, we're slamming them with exams. But it's sorry, I really, this is one of my pet peeves, if you can't tell. it's just not good enough. We're failing young people because we're not giving them the opportunity to learn about what's important. And I don't know if any of you remember your period talk, but again, I've been chatting about this recently and evidently not a lot has changed. So mine went a little bit like a strange woman came into school with a mystery box full of free samples of tampons and sanitary pads. We're not supposed to call them sanitary pads now, but she did. And we were taken to a classroom, and the boys were told that they had a football game. Well, they loved that. So we had this talk, and all I remember from that was, you're going to get boobs, you're going to grow hair in strange places, you're going to get these things called periods, and don't use tampons because you'll get toxic shock syndrome. And I had a phobia of getting toxic shock syndrome and didn't even approach Tampax or tampons until I was in my sort of late teens. And as a keen sports player and dancer, that was, you know, game over. And yeah, so from the word go, we are telling boys that this is not something that they should be part of and that they shouldn't be interested in and care about. And I'm not saying that happens in all schools, but it happens in a lot of schools still to this day. So we wonder why we have stigma in the workplace, and we wonder why it takes 10 years plus to get diagnosed with these conditions. There's the answer right there. It starts at school. It definitely does.
Thank you. I suspect you're not alone in having that sort of experience, Claire. Thank you all very much. It's been extremely interesting and really important to touch upon these issues this evening. So thank you for starting that conversation with us. I think we can now break out into the different breakout rooms. I'm relying entirely on Christine on this. I do not have the technical know-how to do this, but as I understand it, you can go from room to room as you see. Just pick the room that you would like. But before that, thank you very much to Claire, Kate, and Dinah. It's been really fantastic. So thank you for your time and for your input.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
It's been great. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.